the New York chapter director of Encode Justice, a global youth-powered movement for algorithmic justice. And today we are speaking with three incredible technology journalists, Kashmir Hill of the New York Times, Nitasha Tiku of the Washington Post, and Karen Howe of the Atlantic. If you have read any article on artificial intelligence for the past couple of years, you have probably read one of their articles. So we're going to be covering a wide range of topics today, going from one panelist to another, but at around 8:50, we'll open it up to audience questions. So if you have any ideas, you can actually start putting them in the chat, and then we can ask them during or at 8:50. All right, so the first question that we have is, Kashmir, we know that you recently released a book. Can you talk a little bit about that, Clearview AI, and just the general concept of your book?
Yeah, and I'm happy at any time for my fellow panelists to jump in, because we've all covered some of these stories together. And because it is a smaller group, if people want to kind of hop in with questions from the audience, I'm happy for this to be more of a conversation than presentation. But yeah, so I just published Your Face Belongs to Us, and it is about facial recognition technology and kind of this rise of AI and perhaps the end of privacy as we know it. It centers on Clearview AI, this small New York startup, kind of a ragtag crew of founders who scraped billions of photos from the public internet, including social media sites like Instagram, Venmo, LinkedIn. Without anyone's consent, they now have 30 billion faces in their database. And they say that it can identify somebody with something like 98.6% accuracy, find their face all over the internet. And at the time I found out about them, they were secretly selling the tool to hundreds, thousands of police departments, and no one knew that they existed or that police were using them.
Yeah, that is crazy. Manjot?
Yeah, so I'm Manjot. I'm co-director of research at EJNY. And our next question will be for Karen. Karen, can you please discuss the spread of misinformation as new technologies keep appearing? Will this affect the US's upcoming elections?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think the way that misinformation has exacerbated with new technologies with generative AI is essentially that all of the problems we saw with misinformation before are just becoming amplified. There's just more ease with which to produce a lot of fake articles, fake images, and other types of fake content in ways that weren't necessarily available before. But in terms of the way that I think it would affect the US election, I think I do think it will, but in ways that maybe are not as often discussed. I think the fixation on misinfo in the US election is usually on like what happens if there might be a fake image of a presidential candidate. And to me, that's not necessarily the concern, because there's actually a lot of capacity within the US, and there are a lot of journalists that are watching presidential candidates at all times and kind of producing factual, grounded information that can help fact check what is being misinformation that might be produced. But the areas where there's less capacity to do that are in local elections, or also in communities that speak non-English languages. And this is something that we've seen in previous elections where misinformation in Spanish spreads much more rapidly, or in Vietnamese or in Chinese, like it spreads just much more rapidly because companies that are developing these generative tools have spent a lot of time figuring out how to generate these languages, but not enough time figuring out how to detect fake generated versions, articles of this language. And I think the other thing just to add is there are a lot of elections that are happening around the world that are not just the US that are going to be very critical. And there's also, I have much more concern about the elections that are happening that are not in the US because, again, of this capacity issue. There are a lot of countries that don't have the same like capacity of journalists to do all of the fact-checking work and across all of the different languages that these countries speak.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. I feel like I never really thought about like misinformation affecting politics on the global scale.
Yeah, it's definitely a huge problem. I recently talked with a fact checker in Nairobi who was like totally panicked about Kenya elections coming up because it's just they just don't have enough people on the ground to verify everything, to write enough to counteract any false narratives, to deliver it to the right social media platforms where people are and in the right languages. It's an overwhelming problem for them.
Mm.
Hi, my name is Mariama. I'm a fellow at EJ New York. And my question is for you, Natasha. I wanted to know, what is the AI apocalypse, something you referenced in your article, how elite schools like Stanford became fixated on the AI apocalypse.
The AI apocalypse, first of all, thank you for the question. The AI apocalypse is a way to fit this into a headline, first of all. I was referring to a concept around like existential risks around AI. That's maybe the term you might be more familiar with. That's one that has been kind of floating around DC and around various letters signed by big name AI researchers and top CEOs at tech companies. And it's a very particular vision of how AI could go wrong. And it, you know, it might sound very familiar because it unfolds, you know, not unlike some of the science fiction movies that you've seen or the books that you've read. You know, in this vision, humans have created a machine that has achieved like human level intelligence or smarter than human level intelligence. And, you know, it doesn't share human values. It's not aligned with human values in some way. So, through either, you know, having a sub goal of its own, through kind of misinterpreting what you ask it to do in a negative way, or myriad of other ways, things go awry very quickly, you know, because it's able to replicate itself, misinterprets your goal. As I said, you know, that's sort of like this very classic example is you tell it to make paper clips. It kills everyone on the planet in order to have more, you know, building blocks to make paper clips. So I think that the examples have gotten more sophisticated, but the basic argument and the logistics of how it unfolds haven't. And yeah, this is this concept around existential risk that has really captured the imagination of regulators and young people who are really interested in this exciting technology and its potential impact on their future. And there's a lot of money and organization really behind pushing this idea. And there is a shared interest in it with between some of the philanthropists and some of the top tech executives that are pushing some of the most popular generative AI tools. So it's kind of a rare combination where you see both the people heralding the possibilities and the like kind of utopic vision, and the people warning about it, all saying the same thing. So the end result is that their message is the one that's the most amplified.
Great response. I also see how AI can become an apocalypse if we aren't advocating for it to be used safely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
your description of the AI apocalypse is incredibly interesting. I feel like it encapsulates a lot of the ideas that you guys talk about in all of your articles. Um, Kashyap had a question in the chat, but before we get on to that, I wanted to touch on a question for Kashmir because Nitasha, you talked a little bit about how these big philanthropists and CEOs are pushing these artificial intelligence at a grander scale. But Kashmir, in your recent article, you talked about like the ethical wall that a lot of larger companies weren't interested in breaking, and they actually started buying these smaller companies to make sure that this wasn't spread out. But Clearview AI, as you all know, like was not really focused on that. So can you talk a little bit more on your thoughts on that and what the ethical wall is?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that the big tech companies like Google and Facebook were necessarily looking out for us in buying companies in order to, protect all of our privacy. There was this moment around 2010, 2011 when facial recognition technology was starting to get much better, and they wanted to hop on it. And so they bought all these little startups that were starting to make, significant advances. And the example I give in the book is in, I think it was I want to say it was 2011. There was this company that had spun out of Carnegie Mellon called PitPat. It was Pittsburgh Pattern Recognition, and they were working on facial recognition technology, very popular with the DOJ, with the FBI. It was a tool they were starting to use to basically search through surveillance footage to find a wanted suspect, kind of see moments where they appeared. And there's this wonderful privacy professor. He's a professor of privacy economics, Alessandro Acquisti, and he and his colleagues wanted to see how well does this facial recognition technology work in the real world. And so they scraped a bunch of photos from the local CMU network of Facebook, and they set up a little stand on campus and asked students passing by if they would take this survey about privacy in Facebook. And they had to take a picture at the beginning. And so they did that. They're filling out the survey in 10 minutes. And meanwhile, the research team is using the PitPat algorithm to search through Facebook photos and see if they can identify the person in real time. And they were able to do so with about a third of the students, one of whom didn't have a Facebook account, but a friend of his had posted his image to Facebook. And so Alessandro Acquisti did this prepared this big presentation about it at Black Hat, which is this big hacker conference in Las Vegas. And he was going to show everyone and say, look at this, the tools are getting very powerful. We're kind of ushering in this age that's going to be the democratization of surveillance, where, anybody can do something like this because this powerful software is going to start being available. And before he could give the presentation, Google bought PitPat and they privatized the software so other people couldn't do what his team had done. And that really happened across Silicon Valley. Apple bought a startup called Polar Rose. Facebook bought Face.com. And they essentially took the software internally and became the gatekeepers of whether something like Clearview AI would develop, or something like PimEyes, which is another public face search engine. And they did delay it kind of getting into the open because they all decided this is really too dangerous to give the world this ability to take a photo of somebody and find their name, find all this information about them. But eventually, because of this open sourcing of technology that's happened, we have gotten to this point where anybody can, with some technical savvy, can really build a really powerful tool like Clearview AI. And so when I first discovered Clearview AI, I thought they had made some kind of technological breakthrough to do something that Facebook and Google and, intelligence agencies in the United States hadn't done. But what it turned out to be was an ethical breakthrough where they were just willing to go somewhere that their competitors hadn't been willing to go. And now, they have broken that taboo. There are copycats. There's PimEyes, there's other public face search engines. And I think they've opened the doors to maybe some of these big tech companies bringing technology like this forward. They haven't yet, but I do wonder what's to come.
Yeah, that relationship between the big tech companies and the startups is definitely super interesting. So the next question will be Kashyap's question, and I'll ask it to all our panelists. The question is on the topic of AI on geopolitical affairs. How do you think AI and deepfakes are reshaping or exacerbating the current Israeli-Palestine conflict?
That's a great question. I personally haven't yet seen specific examples of deep fakes in particular, like emerging, and that could just be that I am very bad at being online sometimes. But one thing that I think I would look out for is, or there's like two kind of complementary things that I would look out for. One is in these kinds of situations, and we saw this in Ukraine, there will be kind of people that are trying to exploit the panic and the chaos of the situation to try to inject certain types of deepfakes or misinformation that align with a certain narrative. So we saw this a number of times with the Ukraine-Russia conflict, where an image was being portrayed of, like President Zelensky, like not being where he was, or like other types of narratives like that. But the other thing that I think is not as often talked about is, I think there will also be a lot of instances, or there will be potential instances where authorities where it is convenient to do so, might start evoking deep fakes and generative AI as a technology to undermine belief in real evidence of things. So this has happened in other parts of the world where human rights organizations or civil rights activists might try to document war crimes of things that are happening. And then they get challenged in court on the basis that, how do we know that you didn't fake this with a generative AI tool? Because people now have broadly become aware that this is possible. And some experts call this like the liar's dividend. It's very, very cheap. It costs no money to say, how do we know that this is real? But it's extremely expensive to actually then try to verify whether or not something is real. And it slows down a lot of the validation and justice process. So I think those are, like, with every conflict that we've seen in every period of like intense stability or pockets of the world that have had intense stability, we have started seeing very clearly both these two phenomena emerge.
Yeah, I've been curious about the tenor of the conversations on X in particular, which has really changed its moderation policy under Elon Musk. You don't necessarily need generative AI for, or the latest technology for any of this stuff. But like, as we saw, even during the Cambridge Analytica era, bots to inflame existing tensions were extremely effective. And it's not only the chaos and confusion of trying to assess whether some of these like extremely disturbing images are real. I mean, we're still like figuring out some of the the claims from the first days, whether or not those are correct. But the way that people are talking to each other is, I like, as a reporter, I guess, like, my instinct is just like, okay, where are these, like, when did these accounts start? What are they saying? Like, is there a similarity between like some of the terms that they're using? Or is this just what happens when when there's no moderation? I mean, I want, that the algorithms are not, it's automated decision making. So it's not like Elon is going in there and personally tweaking things, although he is still showing up at the top of my feed. But it's the worst videos, right? So it's still engagement oriented, or like attention oriented. that's what I've been thinking a lot about, like how much of this is engineered. And I mean, those are one of the few cases I think where like generative AI actually could be helpful, because it could generate a lot of bots and like maybe a lot of slightly different statements very quickly. But the rest of it, I don't think you need, you know, generative AI to send a slightly altered fake that can so much confusion, like especially in this conflict where you know, what exactly happened and like who's supporting whom is just has already been such a contentious debate. And then of course there's like, you know, the use of AI and surveillance and weaponry. And I think, like, I hope that, I feel like it was a moment of like reality for a lot of the debates that we have been having around AI. Like, this is really how it gets.
I haven't been covering the conflict, but what was striking to me was my colleagues did an analysis of how the initial attack happened in the first place and how they essentially crossed the fortified border that Israel has spent a lot of time building. And there were all kinds of surveillance technologies there and ways of detecting intrusions. And what they did was they knocked out, you know, the internet. They knocked out the remote like cell towers essentially. And so all of these technologies that they thought worked to monitor border, you know, stopped working. And so for me, that's just such a it's not even about AI or deep fakes. It is just a basic technology problem and an infrastructure issue. And I think it's just reflective of the way that we are increasingly putting a lot of trust in technology and kind of letting it make decisions for us over human beings, you know, having human beings there to decide or see, you know, what is happening. And so I found that very striking. And in terms of AI, sorry, I'm getting an intrusion here of my children, but in terms of AI that I'm kind of seeing in conflict, just using facial recognition to try to identify the attackers. I saw BBC basically doing what I assume is a PIMI search to try to suggest that one of the attackers at the music festival was a police officer in Gaza. I was a little surprised to see a mainstream news organization relying on a technology like that. And then in the other land war that's going on right now, Ukraine versus Russia, Clearview AI gave Ukraine their facial recognition technology for free to identify spies, you know, to identify people in the field. And they ended up using it on corpses of soldiers to identify them, find their social networks, send those images to their loved ones in Russia to try to sway public opinion. So yes, you can imagine kind of nasty ways that this could be used in terms of hostages taken, you know, identifying those people. Just finding people's footprints and using that in ways that are quite disturbing.
Right. On the topic of kind of the risky technology that is AI, as well as the use of AI in different countries, the next question is for Karen. Is AI a tool that countries should work together on, or should they keep their developments private from each other?
So I'm always pro collaboration. I do think that we are entering a phase in the world where scientific collaboration is becoming increasingly under threat because we are seeing so many geopolitical conflicts, and countries are starting to turn more inward and be more nationalistic and have the national security conversation dominate technology development a lot more than it has before. And while I do agree that national security is important, and we are seeing many examples around the world of why it is important, that we shouldn't go so far as to suddenly stop scientific collaboration, because it is so important to still be communicating with one another about like global issues, and AI is a global issue. It's a technology without borders. The challenges that we're going to face are going to be challenge that every country is going to face. And there is a lot to be said about how quickly countries can collectively move together in trying to resolve some of these challenges if they were sharing learnings with one another, and also sharing beneficial applications of these technologies with one another. But yeah, like from the position that I sit in, I cover China, US, and AI, and obviously like these two countries are the biggest dominating forces in AI development, and they are currently very not friends. And increasingly there are so many narratives in both countries about how collaborating with the other country will be extremely detrimental to their national security. And this is, to me, a very worrying trend, because there have been a lot of historical examples of how the US and China have come together to develop this technology in ways that have been really promising and really beneficial. And we're going to, I think, unfortunately, increasingly see less of that. And it's also going to have ripple effects in other ways, like the less countries collaborate scientifically, the less they also collaborate geopolitically. This is like a thing that we sort of have seen historically through the US-China relationship. Like scientific collaboration has often been the stabilizing force for the two countries to then come to the table for other discussions like climate change, like other kinds of global challenges. And so the more that we see scientific collaboration, AI collaboration, any kind of that kind of collaboration fraying, and the more distrust that sows, the less we're going to see collaboration on other types of things that are really, really critical right now.
Great response. Scientific collaboration is truly important. My next question is for Nitasha. You recently wrote an article on kiwi farms. Can you discuss what that is and what it means for privacy and safety?
Sorry, Natasha, I think you're
Sorry,
muted.
I just realized that. Sorry. Yeah, Kiwi Farms is an online forum that is kind of along the same lines as some of the more unmoderated ones like 4chan, 8chan, that we've seen go offline once tech companies and then the more infrastructure layer tech companies were pressured to take some accountability for the sites that they were keeping up. So I had written a piece on the 1-year anniversary of Cloudflare, which is a tech infrastructure security company, who kind of never wanted to be in the position of, and none of these companies want to be in the position of having to decide, from down to the, post level, like individual content, or what websites get to stay up or not. They really don't want to be in this position, but Cloudflare did not want to be in the position of deciding whether or not this site, which facilitates harassment of people. It's a troll site, started off as a kind of a joke, but a kind of a vicious joke. And it has facilitated doxing and harassment campaigns against trans people, against other people that it has targeted in the past. And because of some pressure from Keffels, who is a trans, I guess Twitch streamer and YouTuber, Cloudflare took it down, but a year later it's still up. And so I'd profiled a group of people who had worked together kind of in secret, to go ISP by ISP, like country by country, to try and find out who was still keeping this site up online. I think oftentimes, we hear it was taken down, it's off the internet. And I wanted to see, what happens after that. The site's owner, Joshua Moon, he still had a lot of resources, and there are these I think sometimes they call them like shit hosting sites, or like this whole community of people who either because they host like malware, or because they're also involved in like not on the up and up activities, they help keep other sites online. And so he was kind of bouncing between those infrastructure players for a while, and still is. And he has a podcast and a channel where he still shares all of those thoughts. And it was really illuminating, and I feel really grateful that those people were willing to share their experience, because they've faced even more harassment after the article, and they're continuing to face it.
Thank you so much for answering that question, Nitasha. You can see it with your article, and also, again, along with many of the articles that you all have written, on how minority groups are specifically the ones that are especially targeted by biased artificial intelligence or privacy, they're not being privacy. So, Kashmir, I was wondering, you wrote a couple of months ago, or Roe v. Wade was overturned a while ago now. But can you talk a little bit about how artificial intelligence affects the Roe v. Wade overturning, and how abortion is affected by artificial intelligence?
Yeah, so when Roe v. Wade was overturned, there was a lot of concern from activists about the way that, ways that women have been conducting people have been conducting their reproductive lives would suddenly be criminalized in a way that could be very trackable, because people track their fertility on apps, because people Google abortion medicine. We talk on Facebook about pregnancies and whether we want to be pregnant or not. So there was just a lot of kind of concern that these types of activities might be subject to police searches. And there was a big wave of basically delete your fertility app, delete your period tracker. It's mixed. I think that some people I've talked to said that it was a bit of an overreaction, that it's unlikely that police would do kind of a dragnet and try to go to Glow, and say, hey, I want to know everybody in Texas who had missed their period for a few months, and I want their names, and we're going to go and check and see if they're in fact still pregnant or not. So I don't know. With all of these things, I think we have to decide. It's just so hard to live our lives now in a way that's not tracked, where we're not spilling data. And so I write a lot about privacy, but I don't want to make people just hyper paranoid and make them feel like they're living in a panopticon, and you can't do something that is important. I get a Google Calendar alert every month to let me know my period is coming, and it's something that's important to know. And so I don't want to scare people off from doing things like that. I think the realistic risks are it's hard to predict. It's hard to, we have to decide, we have to kind of figure out what we're seeing happen in these states. But certainly this fear that there would see these kinds of dragnets, and we do see some kinds of dragnets happening. I have not, and maybe Karen or Nitasha has, I haven't seen it happen in the fertility space yet, but it is the case that police, when they're trying to solve a crime, there was a case in Colorado of a a family who was killed in a fire. Just some random people showed up in masks at their homes, at their home, and burned down their house. And it seemed like a completely random crime. It was a immigrant community. They thought that it was a hate crime, that they'd been targeted because they were basically a minority group. And police could not figure out who these people who showed up in mass were. And they were kind of failing in their investigation. And so to figure it out, they went to Google and asked for, hey, who Googled the address for this home? And they were able to, through a few different requests, find a group of people who had done that. And it turned out it was a random group of teenagers who did not know the family, where one of them was basically involved in a drug deal, and his phone got stolen, and he had done Find My to find it, and it pinged to this poor family's home. And so this group of, thoughtless, reckless teenagers went there and set the house on fire. And so we are seeing police do more kinds of searches like this, like Google, tell us who in the country, who in the state, who in this community Googled this, or tell us whose phones were in this area near the scene of a crime. That's kind of more the dragnet searches that I'm seeing. There was a great piece in Bloomberg recently about these kinds of searches, going to a big actor like Google that has a lot of information about us and saying who was here, who looked this up. And that is something that constitutional privacy lawyers are concerned about. Like, they don't think that they think that these searches are too broad, and that, police shouldn't be able to do this. And it's tricky. But I have not seen it in the period space yet, but I'd love if Karen and Nitasha could weigh in on their thoughts on that too.
I haven't seen it either. I don't know, Nitasha, have you?
No, I haven't. I think that was the fear and the immediate response, but then it didn't pan out in that way. I think there's just been some social media, like the mom and her daughter, they use some Facebook data, right? Some Facebook communication, but not a dragnet like that.
Thank you all so much. Before we move on to the next question, I just want to touch on Faith's question, which they asked early on. So any one of you guys can answer this. We only have around 15 minutes left, but how do you feel about the integration of AI in higher education in relation to the decline of Gen Z's comprehension? Should it be modified?
I think it's going to be a hard time to be in college. It's just going to be, I've been talking with some students. I've been doing some campus visits recently, and I mean, professors have no idea what they're doing with this technology, and it's very confusing for students to navigate. Like, every single class has a different generative AI tool policy, and every different professor has a very different position on this thing. And some professors make it a very serious violation of academic integrity. Others are encouraging it. And I also think it's going to be hard, for every generation of college students that's come before. there have always been things that tools that we have, or distractions that we have access to, that have, if you are just banging your head against the wall because of a specific assignment, that there's always that pull to be oh, but what if I just use this thing, or just shirked my responsibility and fell into playing video games, this distraction, or whatever it is. And I think that pull has just gotten much stronger. And I think every student will know when they're shortchanging themselves, if you are using a tool in a way that is a shortcut. I think everyone keeps internal tabs on when they feel like they've kind of crossed their own line in kind of shortchanging their learning, shortchanging the exercise that they're going through. But I think it's going to be just there's just going to be so much more of that magnetic pull to kind of cut corners when you're pressed for time, or you're feeling overwhelmed, or things like that. And it's going to be like until we kind of figure out, until each institution and until societally we kind of figure out like what are the appropriate ways to integrate these technologies, it's unfortunately going to be on each individual person to navigate that themselves. And I wish you all best of luck.
Yeah, I mean, like, I always think, you know, how these companies talk about the need to release the tools without, you know, without, like, in order to understand the risks, you need to be able to see how they interact with reality. But the way that these tools interact with students and education, that was a completely foreseeable problem, right? That's a completely foreseeable issue. And I just always really wonder how much, you know, how much feedback did they get and from which kind of teachers? Like, there is some universe, right, where they had 6 months, 3 months, whatever, with teachers, they could have come out with some kind of, I don't know, a warning or whatever. I mean, this is not what you're ever going to get or should even want, really, I guess, from a for-profit company. But I just, there's not a chance for anyone to catch up. I think some teachers are trying really quickly, and there are, you know, really like smart workarounds that I've heard about in terms of, you know, like using ChatGPT to, like, requiring different things from your students, you know, requiring to show me how you, show me the changes that you made in this thing, or, and even like showing and incorporating, like, getting better at the tool in part of your instruction, because I don't think you can turn away from it. But just like Karen said, I mean, the like the difference between from teacher to teacher and expecting kids to have to know that. And I mean, Karen, like, that's amazing that you think that, I mean, you know, that every kid knows when they're shortchanging themselves. I think also a lot of them are just totally disenfranchised already. And like, if you don't feel like you're invested in your own, you know, like if you already feel disenfranchised in school, I don't know, the like unevenness of how education already is in this country, and like just putting a tool into that with a ever-changing price plan, and you know, really an interface that you can get good or better at with plugins, and you know, if you spend a ton of time in Discord and you know how to you know, match it with other tools, it just, it worries me.
What I'm always worrying about is just media literacy. And I think this transcends technology and this transcends generations, but just understanding, where did this information come from? Like, who created this? What's the basis for it? Is it trustworthy? I just remember being in high school or middle school, and I had to go to the library and find reference books with card catalogs. And I was doing a research paper on dolphins. And I remember reading this whole book that seemed like really great and informative. And then in the final chapter, the scientist author confessed that she had fallen in love with the dolphin and that they had started to have sexual intercourse. And I just was like, oh my God, can I use this? Can I use this book as reference material? This seems like this person may be pretty not like biased here. So I think with any kind of material that you're getting, and I think of, you know, the older generation when Facebook came along and they just started getting all these news articles that it looks like the New York Times, it looks like the Washington Post, it looks like the Atlantic, but actually it's like news for you based in like Eastern Russia. And to them, it looked like it was reliable information. And so I think it's the same thing with AI. It's like, why is it telling me this? Where did it get the information from? Is it trustworthy? I think that these are questions that no matter what you're dealing with, whatever system it is, you need to ask yourself that, because yeah, I mean, we can trust these technologies too much, and they will. I always think of the ChatGPT lawyer who asked ChatGPT to help him write his legal memo. and just created this completely false thing. So it's not just Gen Z, we're all struggling with this. And I think people just need to think about, where did this information come from? Drill down on it, and is it trustworthy?
Yeah, that's a great insight. I feel like, especially in this age where you're like getting so much news from social media, finding, or at least like thinking about being media literate can be so hard, because most of the time you're not like going and reading a book or picking something up. Like you're just kind of like tapping through your screen and taking in all this information. And ChatGPT is definitely interesting in higher education too. I know I use it a lot, honestly. I use it to make a study guide this morning. So sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not. The next question I have for all the panelists is, what do you think the government should do to regulate these AI tools?
I mean, the thing I think about a lot, and it's kind of the lens with facial recognition technology, is just where the information, how the information is collected, and the fact that so many of these companies are just going out on the internet and just hoovering up information. Clearview AI sucked up all these faces, but all these other generative AI image generation companies, they're just pulling everything from the general internet. And very upsetting for certain professions like visual artists, that they just took all of their work and put it in their database. So yeah, maybe more rules about the public commons and what you're entitled to, and kind of with privacy regulators actually, in response to Clearview AI, put out this notice to companies and said, just because something's public and it's on a social media site doesn't mean that you're welcome to use it. There are still privacy rights in public data. And we just don't have that in the US. And I do think that that's important. So I think transparency and where they're getting the information from, and then giving us more rights to maybe take information out of databases. Basically with Clearview AI, some people are entitled to go to the company and say, I don't want to be in your database, delete me. If you live in certain states with those kinds of privacy laws, you have those rights. But we don't have that in New York. So you can't do that here. So yeah, just thinking about our rights as citizens, and our ability to control how our information is used.
I would add to that, in addition to privacy regulations, which I totally agree with, strengthening labor laws, because these technologies are clearly already having huge impacts on job automation. And we saw with the Hollywood strikes that there's just, and the car auto manufacturer strikes, that there's just a lot of restlessness now among a lot of different worker groups about the future of their jobs, whether or not they will be protected, whether or not executives will try to cut costs by replacing part of their work or all of their work with AI. And it was amazing. It was sort of an amazing show of force from the Hollywood strikers, that they actually, for so long, like the union just like did not sign any contracts and do any work for, I can't remember how long it was, but just like an unseemly amount of time, for them to finally get these kind of protections for themselves in their contracts, where it says like these executives cannot use AI in these ways to replace these workers, and so on. But like, we can't rely on just unions not working for like 2-3 months to try and get the same protections within their contracts. And that is something we also need to see at a federal level, is like actual ways to guarantee that people will continue to have access to economic opportunity and meaningful economic opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Cash about transparency with that with data sets. That's something that they could do without any cost, and that's something that companies previously did, not with very much clarity, but at least we would know, like, we'd have 5 lines, right, of insight into what's inside a data set. I mean, I really don't have try not to give any policy recommendations. But one thing I've been really alarmed not to see in any of the policy debates around AI is like an absence of discussion about the role of humans and restrictions around what companies can do. A lot of it has been looking at, like I said, this very particular definition of the way that AI can go wrong. And so there hasn't been discussion about like, well, okay, if you have a powerful technology, how many humans do you need to have oversight of? How many, what's the, like, if you think about the, self-driving equivalent, how many human managers do you need to be watching this? How quickly are you allowed to deploy it without humans in the loop? There's like that whole analogy about how quickly it can go. That's something that we as humans have control over. That's not something that happens in and of itself. And I'm really not seeing any discussions about this human decision making, which is how things have gone, how AI has gone wrong in the past. This is not my insight. This is like from wonderful researchers whose papers I've read, but I've really been moved by that, because it's really shocking to see all of these decisions we do have control over get eclipsed by looking at only technological problems and only technological solutions. And I think that's what happens when you have only CEOs in the room.
Thank you all so much, especially with the recent headlines talking about whether Sam Altman is the Oppenheimer of our generation. We can clearly see how there is a lot of fear surrounding artificial intelligence. So it's amazing to get clarity on the future of what AI is, or at least a more clear view. I know it is basically 9 right now, but I think Sam had a great question that Kashmir touched on a little bit already. But with disinformation continuing to come in, Karen talked about this with elections, but can you all talk about how we can prevent us from being consumed by this misinformation, disinformation, and stay educated when reading media?
I think to build on what Kashmir has already mentioned, I think there are often a lot of these guides around how to detect whether text is fake or whether images are fake that look specifically at the artifact itself, like the text or the image. But what Kashmir mentioned is it's actually the context, the stuff around the image or the stuff around the text that is actually much more important in evaluating whether or not it is reliable. Like who posted it, where did the information come from? I think these are questions that whenever you come across any information online, just always keeping in the back of your mind, like double checking the account, double checking like when was it created, like how many followers do the followers seem reliable, always using the context clues rather than trying to decipher like if the text is off or if the images are off, because ultimately that's a losing battle. The technology is going to keep improving and it's going to keep converging more and more towards looking realistic. So just always looking at everything outside of it and its surroundings will be kind of the key to figuring out whether or not you can continue to trust a particular piece of information.
Yeah, I think it's really hard in the pace of the internet, but I often find just like you have to just wait and see. I try really hard never to share something unless I'm absolutely sure. And I find that if you just try to give yourself that kind of bar, you just end up having to wait. And, you know, I'm sure it's frustrating if it's not like, oh, well, your coworker is now investigating like whether or not this is real, so you'll know soon enough. But I think that's like the only way sometimes. And yeah, it ends up, you end up watching from the sidelines as people are, you know, kind of going at each other over this piece of information. But I just find like the context collapse of social media, and people making wild, you know, narratives out of one video, you know, in one moment taken from this way. I mean, it's just, I understand the impulse, and I think that you know, it has a lot to do with like the way that these social networks have like rewired our brains in a way. You know, I'm not speaking scientifically, but I think we can all feel it, right? Like we react to certain things in certain ways, and having war videos in the same place where we see you know, our colleagues and our coworkers and celebrity videos, it's not like we weren't built for this. So I understand the impulse, but yeah, I think like just waiting sometimes is all you can do.
Yeah, I just think like listen to your gut. And if it seems too good to be true, or it seems too outrageous to be true, give it a minute or dig deeper. And we do live in crazy times. You might see a video of, you know, the streets of Brooklyn are flooded and cars are floating, and you think this has got to be generative AI, it's got to be fake, and it turns out to be real. But do just give it a minute and look into it. And I think it's really good advice. Just don't reshare it right away if there's a part of your brain that says, really?
Thank you so much, Nitasha, Kashmir, and Karen. Also, completely get the Brooklyn experience. I live in Brooklyn. My friend was in Grand Army Plaza, and the entire staircase was flooded with water. It looked completely fake, but it was real. Thank you all so much for coming with us and talking and speaking with us and answering audience questions. This was an amazing panel. I learned so much. If you want to follow Kashmir, Nitasha, and Karen, you can check them out at the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Atlantic, which I would say are pretty big media publications. And if you would like to see Encode Justice or be involved with Encode Justice, go to encodejustice.org. We love to have more fellows and more chapters around the world. Thank you all, and stay tuned for the next panel. Bye, everyone.
Thank you all.